try to set the goals for today, or hopefully to try to finish up what we've been discussing for a while now about the Taz in the two cases that he addresses. Case number one, where he mistakenly picked up the kos of Mayim and made Kiddush on Mayim, and case number two, where he made Kiddush on a cup of wine, but then he spilled the wine before he could drink the wine. And I want to dedicate the shir today in memory of many, many young men, Chayalim, that were killed yesterday. And we ask Hashem to protect us from the so many enemies around us that surround us. The Taz, in his initial understanding, had presented a thesis according to which the Kiddush that the Rabbanan require on Yayin is meant to add and to be attached to Kiddush D'Oraisa. But if he already fulfilled his obligation of Kiddush D'Oraisa, stop, and now he's going to go ahead and endeavor to fulfill his Chiyuv Kiddush D'Rabbanan, because he did not fulfill that on the first round, then the Taz, in his opening position, maintains that it's too late. There's no room for Kiddush D'Rabbanan as a separate entity unto itself. It's got to be attached to Kiddush D'Oraisa. Kiddush D'Oraisa is Amiras Dvarim. And Amir Hashem, next time we'll try to analyze that. What exactly constitutes the Amiras Dvarim? It's Divrei Shevach HaKadosh Baruch Hu for giving us the Shabbos, and that's the fulfillment of Zochros Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. The Rabbanan wants you to do that over a cup of wine and then drink the wine. If you did not do so, then the Taz maintains in his original position that it's too late to now set up a new Kiddush simply to fulfill the mitzvah d'Rabbanan, because the Kiddush al Yayin has to be attached to the Kiddush d'Oraisa, to the Amiras Dvarim, which he cannot be now because he's already fulfilled the Kiddush Dvarim, albeit on a kos of Mayim or on a kos of Yayin that was Nishpach, and so that the Kiddush D'Oraisa has been completed, and now in stage two, he wants to fulfill a new Kiddush to fulfill the requirement of the Rabbanan to make Kiddush al Yayin. That he can't do. That's the original position of the Taz. You may recall that he quotes the Shulchan Aruch that says that if Nishpach HaYayin, that all he has to do is bring in another kos of Yayin to replace the one that's spilled and recite a Bar Pri HaGofen. He doesn't have to repeat Kiddush. And the Taz sees in that Psak Halacha of the Shulchan Aruch a proof that Kiddush D'Rabbanan does not stand on its own. Just that he recited a Bar Pri HaGofen, the kos then spilled, he's got to replace that first kos with a second kos of Yayin in order to fulfill the Te'imas Yayin, because that he has to do. But if he does it immediately, without, let's say, Hesech Hadas, so there's no separation, then the Kiddush is now related to the Te'imas Yayin of the second kos. But certainly the Shulchan Aruch passes, you don't have to repeat the Kiddush. And the Taz derives from that the conclusion that Kiddush has already been fulfilled on a D'Oraisa level. There's no room for a new Kiddush on a D'Rabbanan level to fulfill the requirement of Yain. The Taz then quotes a Mari of the Trumas Hadeshen who disagreed with him and came to the conclusion that in a case where he made Kiddush al Hamayim, he has to recite Kiddush again a second time. And we had a great discussion, a long discussion about the Mahariz's equation analogy to the case of Tkios Dima Umod. Fine, that we discussed at great length. So now we look into the Taz to try to understand the following. In the case of Nishpach, we bring in a second kos and we repeat Bori Priyagofen and drink that kos, and that completes the rabbinic requirement of Kiddush al Yain. Another Kiddush is not necessary. Then the Taz goes ahead and says that in the case where he made Kiddush al Mayim, if he has Yain in front of him, then he'll drink the kos of Yain, and he doesn't even have to make a Bar Priyagofen. He kills two birds with one stone. Because since the kos of Yain is Munach Lefanov, although he recited Kiddush on the kos of Mayim, nevertheless, he simply drinks that kos of Yain. He doesn't need another Bar Priyagofen because he already made a Bar Priyagofen. He doesn't need a new Kiddush because he was Yotzei Kiddush D'Oraisa on the cup of Mayim. In contrast, in the case of Nishpach, if he has a second kos which he brings in, then he'll recite a Bar Priyagofen. He won't recite Kiddush again because he was already Yotzei, as we said, Kiddush D'Oraisa on the first kos that was Nishpach. But we try to understand in the Taz's frame of reference, why is it that in the case of the kos Mayim, since he has a kos Yayin available, he doesn't even have to repeat the Bar Priyagofen, whereas in the case of Nishpach HaYayin, he brings in another kos, he's going to have to repeat the Bar Priyagofen. So in both cases, we have a common denominator that there's no repetition of Kiddush, as we said over and over again, because the Taz is now holding that he was Yotzei Kiddush D'Oraisa B'Amiras Dvarim. No repetition of Kiddush. But as far as the Bar Priyagofen is concerned, here the Taz postulates a difference between Nishpach and the case where he made Kiddush al Hamayim. Whereas in the case of making Kiddush al Hamayim, he has the yain, he just drinks the wine and that's it, no Bar Priyagofen. In the case of Kiddush al Hayayin v'Nishpach, he's got to bring in another kos, and now he has to repeat his Bar Priyagofen. So the Bar Priyagofen that he made on the first round is completely gone. And we have to understand this distinction. But before I evoke your response, which I'm very interested, but I just want to clarify one point. My difficulty is enhanced. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is
compounded.
Is compounded. Excellent. Thank you so much. Is compounded by the following. The Shulchan Aruch paskins in Hilchas Birchas HaPeiros in Simon Reish Vav, and he repeats himself in a different form in Reish Tes, that if you have many fruits in front of you on the table, and you pick up one into your hand, and you make a bracha on that pri, and it falls. So as I mentioned last time, if the pri is now not available or not edible, he cannot simply pick up another pri that's munach lefanov, that's in front of him, and eat that pri and be yotzei. And when I asked this question last week, why is it that in the case of Kiddush al HaMayim, where he has yayin munach lefanov, the Taz, based on the Shulchan Aruch Paskins, that you have to repeat the bar priya gofen. Whereas in the case where he picks up a fruit, makes a bar priya eitz on that fruit, and then drops the fruit, he can't simply eat another fruit of the same min, even it's the same type, that's munach lefanov. He's going to have to make another bar priya gofen. And to this, Bobby said last week, which I just want to reiterate what he said, because I think it's the right answer. I don't know if he's still here. Oh, yeah, there you are. That there's a difference between the two cases. In the case where he made a bracha on a particular fruit of that min, which he was holding on to, the bracha was chala that min. On that, not min, I should say, on that particular fruit of that min. He didn't make any mistake about that. He was absolutely correct, and his kavanah was to make a bracha on that fruit. And the bracha now is chal on that fruit. When he drops it and loses it, he loses the bracha as well. And he has to repeat the bracha on another fruit of the same min. And that's because his desire, his intention was fulfilled. Not so in the case of Kos Mayim, where he didn't have any intention whatsoever of making a bracha on the Mayim. And the proof of the pudding is he made a bar priya gofen. He would not have made a bar priya gofen had he known that what he was holding on to was a Kos Mayim. So therefore, his bracha right now of bar priya gofen is, so to speak, suspended in midair. And if he has another kos of yayin in front of him, the bracha now, based on his true intention, not his toes, not his mistake, is now related to that kos of yayin. And I think I want to add one point over here. Not only, as the Taz writes explicitly, the kos yayin is munach lefon, the kos mayim is, the kos yayin is munach lefonov, but moreover, his das was on the kos yayin. It was not on the kos mayim. So if you ask me, in his mind, where does this bracha fall? Where does it directed to? Where it's targeted not at the kos mayim that he picked up in his head, but rather the kos yayin that's munach lefonov. And I'm adding, it was daito al hayayin. Not only is it munach lefonov physically, it's right there on the table, but moreover, his das, his intention was for the yayin and not for the mayin. Not so in the case in the Shulchan Aruch Hilchos Birchas HaPeiros Reish Vav Reish Tes, where his das was on this particular pri, which he grabbed onto and made the bracha on. And then the bracha is either sink or swim, meaning either it exists and survives because it's chal on this pri that he picked up with the full intention of making the bracha on the pri and he ate that pri, or it's not chal at all. It's completely gone. So that's where we got up to more or less in our last meeting. And now I want to go on, but first I want to hear, your input on this. Just speak a little louder.
Just one question for the Rav. Does it make a difference whether or not he actually tastes the water?
I don't think it should necessarily make a difference, because again, even if he tastes the water, he's doing so betos, and then he all of a sudden he realizes, hey, what I got here is mayim. It doesn't taste like yayin. Let me drink the yayin back.
It might be a hefsek.
You have laws of a hefsek and hesek hadas. Again, for that you have to be an absolute baki in Hilchos Brachos in Birchas Hanenim. But in the case again of nishpach, that's a whole different story. Because in the case of nishpach, he clearly wanted the bracha bar priya gofen to be chal on this wine that he was holding on to. Lo and behold, it was nishpach. He brings in another kos of yayin, and he's got to make a new bar pri agafen. That's exactly parallel to the case of the pri, where he made
Yeah.
a bracha
So
on that pri, grabbed the pri, and lo and behold, the pri is gone. It fell on the floor. Bobby?
Yeah, I was going to say about Hesach, but just to be clear, also, like when it says Yain Munach Lefano, as you have explained very clearly, it means there's literally a cup of wine right in front of him. If, for example, he just had a bottle of wine there that he hadn't poured yet, that probably would not suffice.
You have to know,
Because,
Bobby, these are right. If he has to bring in wine from a different room,
no, that's for sure. But
or wine from a drawer, a closet, or so, that's for sure.
right.
But if it's there in a bottle and he
But
hasn't even poured the
in
bottle,
other
I
words,
don't know. I'm not sure.
the,
There are a
the
lot of gray
shaila,
areas here.
well, the shaila in my mind would be, in other words, it doesn't quite say that, like, in other words, I'm picturing this case now the way you're describing it, as if there were two cups in front of him and he just picked up the wrong cup.
Right.
Whereas if he never had wine poured in front of him, I'm not sure that you would say the
Right. But,
same.
if we read the Taz carefully, let me see if I can get you the language of the Taz. Maybe I'll go back to the Taz in the original. Let me just see if I can find that line that's relevant.
well, could you go back?
He writes the following. Im hoya b'shas hakidush yayin al hashulchan
Oh, so he doesn't.
o al hasafsol etzlo, as opposed to in another room, muchan lishtos. So I don't know if that means he poured it already, or it's on the shulchan and all he has
No,
to do. I don't
that's
know.
much more further than what we were saying. It's much more that even if it's there, not in a bottle, that would be good enough. Which that to me is a big Kiddush, but okay.
Again, so Bobby, for that, I defer to Hilchas Birchas Aperos, Mamish, Tif.
So
We
would
really
you
have to
say
know all
then,
those details.
would that be determined on also the idea with the pre, that if it was a grape that he had, as opposed to a complete pre, if he just had one grape, in other words,
I
when
don't
he's
know. You know
making this,
what? I'll tell you the truth. At this point, Joe, I'm going to have to defer because once we start going into the case where you hold a pre, we are mamish entering into Hilchas Birchas Aperos, and we'll never
okay,
finish this task.
okay, never
So,
mind.
with your permission, I'm going to say let's leave that and all the nitty gritty details and nuances for a different occasion because we want to get back to Kiddush. Okay. Now, the Taz, in his analysis of the case of Nishpach, writes that Ha'ikar tolui bekiddush shetzarch litom yayin b'shas kiddush. So I think this is the key of keys in the Taz. 4 words. Yeah, I think it's 4. Sheyitom yayin b'shas kiddush. Therefore, the Taz says that although he messed up and he spilled the wine, so right now he's got the Taz used the word a kilkul meaning he messed up, and his kilkul is in the fact that there's no te'ima b'shas kiddush, says the Taz, but if he brings in other wine to replace the wine that's spilled, then he is mitaken. He fixes up that kilkul, drinks the second cup of wine that replaces the first, And although he needs a bar pri agafen, but he doesn't repeat Kiddush because he was only lacking because of that kilkul a te'ima b'shas Kiddush. Now, if they again, how many seconds they'll give, I don't know. Don't catch me on this. They'll bring him a substitute cup of wine very quickly, and now he'll drink that wine after he makes a bar pri agafen, and that is considered te'ima b'shas Kiddush. So again, I want to emphasize that in the Taz's frame of reference, even in the case of Nishpach, where you don't have to repeat the Kiddush, the Taz makes the following conditions. That after the wine spills, I'm going to use the word immediately, whatever that means. Let's not get caught up in details because I don't know the answers to that question. But immediately, they bring him a second kos of yayin. He drinks that wine, and the two important points here in the Taz are A and B. A, that he was only missing through his kilkul a te'imas yayin b'shas kiddush, and B, he can bring in the second kos, and the second kos, when he drinks it, will be a tikkun on that kilkul because it gives him te'imas yayin b'shas kiddush. That's what we have in the Taz so far. Now, what I find very fascinating, and I'm trying to wrap my head around this, is that it seems to me that the Taz is operating with two different dinim. He's differentiating between the Bari Pri Agafen and the bracha on the Kiddush itself. Meaning that even though he can now bring in a substitute, kos shel yayin, to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush of Te'imas Yayin B'Shas Kiddush, nevertheless, as far as the Bari Pri Agafen, he requires another Bari Pri Agafen. And my question is, and maybe it's naive on my part to raise such a question, but if the second cup of wine that they bring in can substitute, could step into the shoes of the first kos that was nishpach to such an extent that he now has te'imas kiddush, te'imas yayin b'shas kiddush, why can't that be enough to save the Bari Pri Agafen such that now he doesn't need another Bari Pri Agafen? Meaning, what I see unraveling in front of my eyes when I read this Taz is what I call tzvei dinim. Now, categorically, we classify the first bracha, namely Bari Pri Agafen, as a birchas hanehenin. The second bracha, which is Kiddush, that's what you call a birchas shevach v'hodoya, right? Because the essence of Kiddush is shevach, to thank Hashem for the glorious gift of Shabbos. It seems to my mind that the Taz is maintaining that the standards for Birchas Hanenim are different than those of a Birchas Shevach V'Hodoya. Meaning that, as we saw earlier, in Birchas Hanenim, once you make the bracha on the first kos that was nishpach, that bracha is gone. Whereas, as far as the Birchas Kiddush is concerned, I can still bring in a second kos, fulfill the Te'imas Yayin B'Shas Kiddush, and salvage the Birchas HaKiddush. What I mean to say is that in Birchas Hanenim, we're going to require what I call a tziruf, something that really connects your bracha with the achila that you eat or drink after the bracha. In Kiddush, on the other hand, classified as a birchas shevach v'hodoya, I have a breathing spell. Again, I don't know how long it is. Certainly there's no hesek hadas allowed here. I'm just looking around for the yayin to fulfill the timas yayin. But it's not immediate, meaning there's no tziruf. I'll give you a mashal lema dover dome. There's something called tashrat, which means that I blow a shvarim trua. There's a gigantic machlokas about shvarim trua. According to some Rishonim, shvarim trua requires what's called neshima achas. Again, I wouldn't recommend becoming a shofar blower according to those Rishonim, unless you're a bugle blower and you got all the lungs in the world. What it means is, again, I don't know what your shvarim sound like, but let's say, you do true immediately without even coming up for a breath of air. According to other Rishonim, no. Shvarim, trua. So you see that there are two dinim here. I'm just giving you a mashal. According to one approach, shvarim trua is one kol. It's one long kol, and it doesn't tolerate anything but a tziruf. You need a tziruf to get the shvarim and the trua together to create that kol called tashrat. Shvarim trua. According to other Rishonim, no. Of course, he can't be mafsik between the shvarim and the trua. Start singing Yankel Doodle Dandy or whatever you say. That you can't do. Oh, Canada, I should say, right? But that you can't do. But it doesn't have to have a tziruf. What I'm suggesting now is that the Taz holds that Birchas Hanen requires a tziruf. Anything less than a tziruf, meaning you drop the fruit, or in this case, nishpach hayayin, that's not going to cut the mustard. It's not going to do the deal. But in Birchas Shevach V'Odoya, representing other brachos, it doesn't have to be a tziruf. As long as there's no hefsek, as long as there's no positive, what we call in Hebrew, ba'ofen chiyuvi, there's no hefsek, then you're okay. But now, the Taz addresses the case of Mayin. And what I want to show you in the text of the Taz is that he calls it benidon didan, meaning in our case, because our case is not the case of Nishpach, that's later on in the Shulchan Aruch. But in our case of Mayim, the Taz doesn't mention anything about kilkul, anything about tikkun, anything about te'ima b'shas kiddush. All that language, that lingo, that terminology is completely omitted. What does the Taz write? He says two things. He says, number one, that the kos, again, in order to salvage the kiddush, he says the kos of yayin is munach lefanov. And number two, he quotes a Gemara in Brachos on Daf Nun Aleph Amud Beis in Brachos, which I'll present to you that Gemara in a minute. But there's no word about kilkul, about tikkun, about fixing up. He doesn't have the whole terminology of te'ima. And the truth be told, I don't even know why he needs these two explanations for nidon didan for the case of Mayim. I would say it's a kal v'chomer. If you're telling me that in the case of Nishpach, he just brings in another kos, then how much more so in the case of Mayim, where the kos was there and he just picked up the wrong kos? What forces the Taz to look for a justification, an explanation for salvaging Kiddush in the case of Mayim? What was bothering his mind, and why did he come up with two new explanations? So I think the pshat is as follows. I'm going to try to read it into the words of the Taz. There's a fundamental difference between Nishpach and Mayim. In the case of Nishpach, he recited Kiddush al Hayayin. Narvas, he's missing Te'imas Yayin b'shas Kiddush. What I mean to say is as follows. There are two parts or two dimensions to Kiddush D'Rabbanan and Rabbinic Kiddush al Yayin. One is having a cup of wine at the time that you recited Kiddush. Here's my cup of wine. There's another dimension and requirement, and that is Te'imas Yayin. But that dimension is what I call external. What do I mean by external? That's a very bad word to use here. But what I mean to say, it's not the essential requirement in the Maisa Kiddush. The Maisa Kiddush requires Kiddush al Yain. So the Taz says that he did Kiddush al Yain. He recited Kiddush al Yain. Narvas is another requirement, which I think is again, I don't know what word to use, a secondary or an external requirement. It's not essential to the Maisa Kiddush, and that is to Imas Yain. B'shas Kiddush. That's called a kilkul because the Yain spilled, and he's lacking that element of Te'imas Yain, but the Kiddush is okay. Says the Taz, there's room for tikkun. When you have a kilkul, you can do a tikkun, like in Hilchos Shabbos, right? So what do you do for a tikkun? You bring another cup of wine, and now you drink that second cup of wine. But the reason why it's meaningful and helpful is because you did the Maisa Kiddush, Karai. There was a Maisa of Amiras HaKiddush al Yayin. So we could check off that box. And the essential part of the Maisa Kiddush was fulfilled. The kilkul was on the secondary chitzoni requirement of what? Of Timas Yayin B'shas Kiddush. That you could be mitaki. But in the case of Mayim, the Taz says there's a much more fundamental issue over here. You can't just say, well, let him drink the wine. The Kiddush was recited on Mayim. There is now a problem in the Maisa Kiddush itself. It's not just the kilkul that lends itself to tikkun. This is not externalities. This is not secondary problems. This is an essential problem, the Maisa Kiddush. And the Taz is now trying to figure out how the Kiddush that he recited al Mayim, which is not even a Maisa Kiddush, on a Drabanan level, of course, could now be Chal on the Yayin. And for that, he gives a whole new explanation. So again, the main point that I'm trying to convey here, and again, it would be a lot easier if it was face-to-face than on Zoom, is the following, that the Taz could not offer the solution, called a tikkun, of Te'ima on the second coast, meaning the coast of Yayin, as he did in the case of Nishpach. In the case of Nishpach, he's got a good Kiddush. The language of the Taz is the following. Ze ira, he's talking about Nishpach. Ze ira lo kilkul b'te'imas hayayin. Avol kiddush olav kidin. Do you hear the language of the Taz? 3 words, very important. Kiddush olav kidin. Kidin meaning he fulfilled his requirement of Kiddush. Ella, shekilkel, what was his kilkel? Sheyef shalolito, because now it's spilled on the ground, he can't drink the wine. Is yuchal letaken ha'ivus, ivus is another word for kilkel, sheyitom yayin acher. Now, if we fast forward a little bit to Nidon Didan, when he talks about Mayim, there he says that the yayin was muchan lefanov, and yishteh hayayin hamunach lefanov, and he quotes a tshuva the Maril, which is back in that Hilchos Birchas Haperos Siman Reish Tes, quoted by the Ramah. The Havi Ki'ilu Kiddush al Yayin. Whoa, whole new language. The Havi Ki'ilu Kiddush al Yayin. In order to explain Havi Ki'ilu, do you see what he has to do here, the Taz? He's not able to say, well, the Yayin is Munach Lefanov, and therefore just drink the Yayin and you fulfill Te'ima V'shas Kiddush. No, that's not going to cut the mustard, because Lo Kiddush Karoi, right? Lo Kiddush Karoi. I'm quoting the Taz. V'havi Ki'ilu Lo Kiddush Klal. It's as if he didn't make Kiddush at all, because he made Kiddush al Mayim and not on Yayin. But if he's got Yayin Muchan Lefanov, then Havi Ki'ilu Kiddush al Yayin. Right, we just finished saying he wasn't Mekadosh al Yayin. Now we're saying he is Mekadosh al Yayin. Why? Because the Yayin is Muchan Lefanov. Now, if he has no Yayin Muchan Lefanov, and he's got to bring Yayin from who knows where, even without Hesech Hadas, then he lost the Kiddush. Again, on the D'Rabbanan level. Why? Because lo Kiddush karoi. Ki'ilu lo Kiddush klal. So the Taz is invoking a brand new halacha here. He's pressing a brand new button here on the computer. And that is Havi Ki'ilu Kiddush al Yayin. Right? He made Kiddush al Mayin, but it's Havi Ki'ilu Kiddush al Yayin. Magically. And why? Because it's Muchan Lefanav. So the Muchan Lefanav here is the counterpart, but substituting and contrasted with the case of Nishbach, where there it's Te'imas Yayin B'Shas Kiddush by bringing in another kos. Here, it's a different halach entirely. It's Havi Ki'ilu Kiddush al Yayin. Ubazeh Amrinon, those are key words. Ubazeh Amrinon, meaning we're going to flex a certain principle. Kulu Navgi Diber Chasaninu. 4 words from a Gemara in Masechta Brachos on Daf Nun Aleph Amid Beis. What's the story in Brachos on Daf Nun Aleph Amid Beis? Let me just get out of Gemara. Okay. This Gemara is from Lemberg, 1860. It's a little bit old, so I got to be very careful, when I open it. Oh, the Gemara says the following: Ula ikla lebei Rav Nachman. Okay, Ula visits Rav Nachman, and Yavla kasa diber chasa. Rashi says that at the end of the meal that they ate with Rav Nachman, they benched, and they brought for benching a kos. That kos of Birkas Hamazon is an example of what? General category of kos. It's called a koshel brach. Amalei Rav Nachman, lishtar mar kosa diber chasa lilta. Now, Rav Nachman was married to a woman by the name of Milta. And apparently, I'm not sure about this, she didn't have any children, I think, at that point. So Rav Nachman asks Ula to please send the kos of Birkas Hamazon to his wife Malta so that she'll drink from the koshel brach. So if you're into spooks or skulos, this is an interesting skula. And the Gemara goes on to prove, based on a pasuk in Dvarim, Uberach pri bitnech, that drinking from a koshel bracha is a skula for having children. Comes along Ula, and he says, no. I want you, Rav Nachman, to drink from the koshel bracha. Why? Because he goes ahead and he proves that the promise, the divine promise of Uberach pri bitnech depends upon the husband. So even though the bracha is chal on the wife, but nevertheless it goes through the intermediary of the husband, and therefore you could drink from the wine, and that's fine. Maybe he was worried about tznius. I don't know exactly why, but he said it was fine. We don't have to send it to Malta. You yourself drink the kos. Ada hachi shama Yalta. So Yalta gets word of this, that Ula doesn't want to send her the koshel bracha. And kama bezira, Rashi says, amda bekas. Whoa, this is like the beginning of women's lib over here, right? Amda bekas. What do you mean? You don't want to send me the koshel bracha? This reminds me, I don't know, I shouldn't say this out loud, but in my part of the world, I hope it's not true in Canada, but here, when they invite a couple to a wedding, on the outside of the envelope, it says L'chvod Rabbi so-and-so by name, and then it says Virayaso. They didn't even mention the name of his wife. So again, I'm not going to tell you who, but I know of one woman that I know of who gets very insulted by that. What, they don't know my name? Anyway, So what does she do in the state of anger? Also the Bechamra, she goes into the chaviot, how do you say, the barrels of wine, vitavre, and she breaks them. She smashes them out of anger. Amalei Rav Nachman, so Rav Nachman says to Ula, Rashi says he wants to be Matthias, his wife Malta, and he tells Ula, Nishade lemar kos achrina. Send her a different cup of wine from the barrel, what's ever left. And the Gemara says, Kol kahai nivga divrchasahavi. Exactly the words of the Taz that we're looking at now. Which means that the wine in the barrel is all part of the bracha and can be used as a kosher bracha. Now, before I go on, I just have to ask you, take a little short census. What do you do on Friday night? There are many people at the table. I'm going to give you two options. We'll call it A or B. A, you take the wine in the Kiddush cup, you drink or pour off, for hygienic, pour off your part of the wine, and then you pass around the wine. Or B, everybody has their own cup of wine. That's B. So if we want everyone to drink from the Kiddush, in B, option B, you don't have to guarantee that every single person drinks from the kos of yayin. Like, for example, I'll be honest with you, I have a certain wine that I like to drink. Very hard to get a hold of it. It's a little bit expensive, not so expensive. So I don't want to give everyone from my cup of wine. I'm left with nothing. So everybody pours before. That's option B. Just curious, by show of hands, if you can. I mean, we're not a large group here, unfortunately. But anyway, how many people in the audience here, by raising hand, do option A, in which they pass around the kos? 1, 2. 2 out of 4. Okay. How many do option B, in which everybody has their own kos? Okay, so we have 2 out of 4. So now, I'm going to tell you the following. I found in the poskim that they say it's good enough that everybody has their own cup. Why? Because the Gemara here in Brachos establishes that the status of the kosher bracha applies to all the wines that are there in the room. Even if they're in a barrel, just take out some wine from the barrel. The parallel to the barrel in our contemporary life would be the bottle. So you got a bottle of wine on the table, you make Kiddush, you're holding on the kos. Anybody could take that bottle and pour off the wine, and it's a kosher bracha. It's part of Kiddush. I believe, and I say this from the bottom of my heart because my chavrusa doesn't want to accept this, that what the Taz has in mind here is he's got a twofold solution to the problem of mayim. And each solution addresses a different dimension. Solution number 1 is hayayin muchan lefana. And that's going to solve his problem of bori priya gofen. I mean, he took this kos of mayim, he made a bori priya gofen on the mayim, and now he can't drink the mayim. He's going to drink another kos that they bring in him. L'chora, he should have to make another bori priya gofen. The answer is nain. As we discussed at great length, he had in mind that his bracha should be on yayin. There was a toast, and he never meant that his bracha should be on mine. But now the Taz has to address another question. That's fine as far as bori priya gofen, but what about the Kiddush? As far as Kiddush is concerned, he did not make Kiddush on this kos of yayin. He made Kiddush on a kos of mayim. Ad kidei kach that the Taz writes ki ilu lo kiddush klal, because he didn't make Kiddush on yayin. Now the Taz quotes a Gemara in Brachos Nam Aleph Amud Beis. What does the Taz want to tell us? That even the kos of yayin is the kos of Kiddush. As if he made Kiddush on that kos of yayin. How can you say such a thing? Where's the magical abracadabra that he made Kiddush on this kos of yayin? But the answer is that the Gemara holds that any yayin that's there, the kosher bracha is chal on that kos, even though it's not the kos that he picked up. Is Mamela, the Taz now has two different issues. And with this we'll conclude. He has one issue as far as Nishpach is concerned. There he says the Kiddush was a valid Kiddush because he made Kiddush on Yayin. Narvas, he's lacking because of his kilkul Te'ima B'Shas Kiddush. So he'll bring another kos of Yayin to replace the one that spilled, and he brings it immediately. And now he fulfills Te'ima. Again, he doesn't have a Ma'aser Tziruf in a positive sense, so therefore he needs a Bar Pri HaGofen. But as far as Birchas HaKiddush is concerned, as a Shevach, Vodoya, no problem. We don't need a Ma'aser Tziruf as long as there's no Hesek Hadas, there's no Hefsek. And now the Birchas HaKiddush is Chal on the second wine because, again, his original Kiddush was a valid Kiddush. It was on wine. So he's metaking the Ivus by Te'imas Yayin B'Shas Kiddush from the second kos. But in the case of Kiddush al Mayim, there the Taz insists, and again, you can read this Taz 1,000 times and not realize it. The Taz is implying that in the case of Kiddush al Mayim, there's no Kiddush at all. The Ma'aser Kiddush, the Amiras Hadvarim, was not, again, on the D'Rabbanan level valid because he was holding on to Mayim and not to Yayin. Taz says if he has Yayin Munach Lefanov, now he's going to solve two problems with two different principles. As far as the Bar Pri HaGofen is concerned, he's going to solve that problem because it's Yayin Munach Lefanov, and he meant to say a Bar Pri HaGofen on that Yayin. And therefore, the Bar Pri HaGofen was never Chal on the Mayim. As far as the issue of Kosher Kiddush, in order to salvage the Ma'aser Kiddush, the Amiras HaKiddush, here the Taz needs the Gemara in Brachos. And the Gemara in Brachos is going to establish that even the yayin that's on the table, anywhere in the room perhaps, even in a chavis, is considered a kosher bracha. And therefore it's as if he made his Kiddush on that kosher bracha. Adkan. Rabosai, I wanted to finish the Taz today. Lo also biyod. I need another 45-minute shir on the Taz. So with your reshus, I guess I don't know that there's any problem next Wednesday. So we should have a shir next Wednesday, unless I don't know something. It's very close to my birthday, but that's irrelevant. Anyway, what we're going to do next Wednesday is try with Hashem's help to finish the Taz. And this shir should be Ili Neshama of so many Neshamas that died. And again, it's just mind-boggling. I can't even understand it. It's very hard for me. Very hard. Okay, then. Shenishma b'sorot tova.